Guten Abend. Guten
Lovely good evening. A very warm welcome here in Berlin. A very warm welcome on behalf of the Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst, the German Academic Exchange Service. So great to have you here tonight to the former bath in the Prenzlauer Berg area. If the information is right, we have people from 27 countries. If you want a small-scale European Union, it's great to have all of you here despite the pandemic. For us to be together in this scope is fascinating. It expands our horizons. Thank you for joining. I'm Jens Krepela. I'm a journalist, a moderator, and it's my pleasure to take you through the event this evening. When I say you, welcome to Berlin. I would also say welcome from Berlin to you, dear viewers at home who have digitally connected themselves to our live stream. Great that you have taken the time, that you are taking the time. You're not only meant to be passively listening to what we're doing, no, you're also given the opportunity to get rid of your ideas, to speak about your ideas and speak up. I'll explain later how it works. You'll not miss out anything. Well, let me narrow that down. The aura here, the scent that is transported not as easily by live stream. Truly, we're in a swimming pool. The Stadtbad by Oderberger Straße opened in 1902 as a municipal baths. That was necessary at the time for hygiene at the time. Berlin grew and kept growing, and it was used until the mid of the 1980s. Then it sank into a deep sleep and for some years has been used for events, also as a hotel, but also as a pool. So where you're all sitting, this is the pool, and the water is still inside, I have been told, except that the floor has been moved upward. So it's not only a hybrid event, also an amphibic event. I hope you're not getting wet feet. So if there is, do speak up and tell me. Right, the motto of the alumni meeting of the DAAD and the motto of tonight, of course, is get out into the future. How will we move Europe forward? This is a question that keeps being more important against the backdrop of recent years, what has happened. So even these minutes, people from Ukraine arrive here at the Berlin Central Station because they're fleeing the war. They're seeking protection in Europe, and they're banking on the European Union and its values. How do we handle it? Have we got the right approach? And how can the future be shaped in view of that war? We will deal about that. We'll speak about that. But to kick it off, we have someone to welcome you as well. This is, if you will, the host of tonight, the president of the DAAD, Professor Dobrato Mukherjee. And the floor is yours.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren,
ladies, gentlemen, dear members of the European Parliament and the Deutsche Bundestag,
liebe Frau Koch, lieber Udo Bullmann, liebe Kolleginnen und
dear
Kollegen,
colleagues, above all, dear alumni and alumni of the DAAD. It is a great joy for me to have the first huge European-wide alumni meeting for me to open this event. Our event today, our get-together, originally had been planned for October 2020, and this way it would have been right in the midst of the European Council presidency. And so much also that event, on account of the pandemic, had to be postponed, so I'm all the happier that we are getting together today. And as you've heard, in this wonderful location. This way we have the wonderful major point of a long path that you, dear alumni, have gone down. You have accepted the DAAD invitation to address the central challenges, but also the opportunities of the European Union.
Denn eines ist
One
klar,
thing is
die
clear and
politischen
sure.
Schwerpunkte bleiben über
Political
die deutsche
emphasis
EU-Ratspräsidentschaft
beyond the European
hinaus
Council
aktuell.
presidency remain
Als Leitgedanken, die im
current,
deutschen
remain
Programm
up to date
formuliert
as the
wurden,
guidelines
sind
as
vor
they were
allem die
worded in the
folgenden
German
beiden zu
program.
nennen,
We have the
die im
following two in
Kontext
particular.
der aktuellen
In the
Situation
context
in
of the current
Europa
situation in Europe,
relevanter sind
they are
als
even
je
more
zuvor.
relevant than they
Zum
have ever
einen
been before. For one,
ein Europa der Sicherheit
Europe
und der
of
gemeinsamen
security,
Werte.
safety and joint
Und zum
values
anderen
and common values. And
eine
for the other,
handlungsfähige Europäische Union
European
für eine
Union that is fit to
partnerschaftliche
act
und
in
regelbasierte
partnership in a
internationale Ordnung.
rules-based international order.
Mit der Übernahme der
By
G7-Präsidentschaft
taking over
in
the
diesem Jahr
G7
setzt
presidency
Deutschland sein
this year,
Engagement
Germany will step
für eine
up its
gemeinsame
commitment
Herangehensweise an die
for a
globalen
common approach to
Herausforderungen
the
unserer Zeit
global
fort.
challenges of our
Die
time.
drei zentralen
The
Themen
three central
sind
issues
eindeutig.
are clear
Mit
and
seinen Partnern
unequivocal.
innerhalb und außerhalb
With its
Europas
partners
will
inside
sich
and outside
Deutschland für eine
Europe,
bessere
Germany wants to stand up
Klimapolitik,
for better climate
eine
policies,
Stärkung des
strengthening
Multilateralismus und eine
multilateralism
größere
and
Widerstandskraft von
a higher
Demokratien
resilience
einsetzen.
of
Es sind
democracies.
diese Themen, die die
These
Zukunft
are the
Europas
issues
bestimmen.
that will determine the
Und es ist
future of
gut,
Europe, and
dass
this
wir
is
sie in
good.
unterschiedlichen
that
Ausprägungen
we're having
auf der
different
Tagesordnung für dieses
shapes
Alumni-Treffen
of
haben.
it on the agenda for
Die
today's
Corona-Pandemie hat
alumni
uns
meeting.
deutlich
The
gezeigt, dass wir die
Corona-pandemic
globalen
has shown
Herausforderungen
that the global
nur
challenges
gemeinsam
ahead of us can
bewältigen
only
können.
be mastered
Gleiches gilt
together.
für die
This likewise
Auswirkungen
applies to
des
the
Klimawandels.
impact from climate
Bereits in den
change.
vergangenen
As
Jahren
early as in
hat
previous
Deutschland im
years,
Verbund mit
Germany, in
Ländern wie zum
association with
Beispiel
countries
Frankreich
such as
in der EU
France,
Impulse gesetzt,
has set
um die
impulses in the
anstehenden
European
großen
Union for the
Veränderungen
major
gemeinsam zu
changes
gestalten.
to be shaped
Im Bereich der
together.
Klimapolitik
In the area of climate
wurden die ersten
policy,
Weichen
the
hin
first
zu einem
joins
klimafreundlicheren,
towards a more
nachhaltigeren
climate-friendly,
Wirtschaftsmodell
sustainable
gestellt.
business model
Mit dem
have
Europäischen
been set
Wiederaufbaufonds,
with the European
der grünes
Restructuring
Wachstum
Fund
und einen
that makes
Digitalisierungsschub
green growth
begünstigt und
possible
so einen
and
Beitrag zum Erreichen der
digitalization push,
ehrgeizigen
and this contributes to the
Klimaziele des
ambitious
Green Deal
climate
leisten soll,
goals
steht
of the
ein
Green Deal.
erstes
This way,
konkretes
a first
Instrument zur
concrete
Verfügung,
tool has
um
been
diesen
made
Wandel zu
available
begleiten
to accompany
und
this
zu gestalten.
change and to shape it.
Neben der Klimapolitik
On
stehen
top of
andere
climate
Themen auf
policy,
dem
there are
Programm
other
unseres Treffens,
topics
Ihres
on the
Treffens, die vor dem
program
Hintergrund
of
des
your
Kriegs
meeting,
in der
our meeting,
Ukraine
against the
kaum
backdrop of the war
relevanter
in
sein können.
Ukraine could hardly
Wir haben
be
in den
more
vergangenen Jahren
relevant.
beobachtet,
In recent years,
wie sich in
we
einigen Ländern
observed,
Europas
like in many
ein
countries,
wachsender Rechtspopulismus und
right-wing
Nationalismus
populism,
verbreitet hat,
nationalism
der
spread in
auch
countries in
Auswirkungen
Europe
auf die
that also has an
internationale
impact on
Wissenschaftskooperation
international
auch in
academic
Europa hat.
cooperation, also in Europe.
Diesen Tendenzen
Those
eine
tendencies,
starke demokratische Zivilgesellschaft
facing that with
entgegenzusetzen,
a strong
war
democratic
und
civil
ist von
society
größter
has been
Bedeutung.
and is of the
Seit 3
magnificent
Wochen
impact of
sehen
the
wir auf
greatest
bedrückende Weise,
magnitude. And we
dass
have
sich
been
die
seeing for
seit
3
längerem
weeks in a depressing
anbahnende
way that the
Systemrivalität
systems
zwischen
rivalry
autoritären
between
Staaten
authoritarian
einerseits
states on
und
the one
Ländern,
hand
die nach
and
Freiheit westlicher
countries
Art
that are
streben,
yearning
andererseits
for Western
massiv
freedoms,
verschärft hat.
democratic freedoms,
Wir
has
müssen
massively
erkennen,
been stepped up.
dass
We
der
must see
russische Angriff auf die
that the Russian
Ukraine
attack
eine
on
ernsthafte Bedrohung
Ukraine
für die
is a
westliche
serious threat
Werteordnung
for the
sowie die
Western
regelbasierte
values and
internationale
the
Ordnung
rules-based
insgesamt
international
darstellt.
order all in all.
Wir sehen damit drängender
This
denn
way
je
we see
zuvor,
more
dass
pressing than ever
unser
before
European Way
that
of
our
Life
European way of
aktiv
life
verteidigt
is
werden muss.
actively in need of
Mit seiner
defense.
Regierungserklärung hat Bundeskanzler Scholz
The
politische
Federal Chancellor
Weichenstellungen
Scholz in
von
his political
großer Tragweite
address
vorgenommen,
did
indem
major
außen- und
changes of large
sicherheitspolitische
major
Gewissheiten der
bearing
letzten
by
Jahrzehnte über
shedding
Bord geworfen hat und dies
foreign
mit
policy
guten Gründen.
securities.
Welche
And with
Konsequenzen
a
der
right
Krieg in der
reason, what
Ukraine für
consequences the
unsere
war in the
europäische
Ukraine
Art zu leben
will have for
eben
our
den European Way of Life
life
langfristig
in
haben
the
wird,
long run.
darum soll es unter
This is
anderem
something
auch
that we will
in
be
den
talking
Workshops
about in
dieser
the workshops
Veranstaltung gehen.
of this event of ours.
Ein anderes Thema ist ebenso
Another
aktuell.
topic is just as
Forced
current.
Migration to
Forced
Europe
migration
lautet der
to
Titel
Europe is the
eines
title
Workshops
of one of the
dieses
workshops
Alumni-Treffens.
of this alumni
Seit dem Jahr
meeting.
2015
Since
ist
2015,
Migration eines der
migration has
zentralen
been one
Themen
of
für
the
die Europäische
central
Union.
topics for the European Union.
Der Bürgerkrieg in Syrien,
The civil war in Syria,
andauernde Konflikte in der
ongoing
Sahelzone
conflicts
in
in the
Afrika,
Sahel
die
zone in
Machtübernahme der
Africa,
Taliban in
the power
Afghanistan im
takeover
vergangenen Jahr.
of the Taliban in
All diese
Afghanistan
Konflikte
last
haben
year,
Menschen
all these
gezwungen,
conflicts
vor Krieg
forced
und
people
Gewalt
to
zu
run
fliehen
away from
und sich auf
war
den
and
Weg
violence
nach
and
Europa
to
zu machen.
go towards Europe.
Seit genau 3 Wochen
It's been for 3 weeks
findet der
now
Krieg
that
nur
the
2
war
Flugstunden
is
von hier
only
entfernt
2
statt
plane
und die
hours away
Fluchtrouten
from here, and the
verlaufen
flight
mitten in Europa.
routes are right
Was
at the
das
heart of
bedeutet,
Europe.
sehen wir
What will
jeden
it
Tag in den
mean? We see
Nachrichten
that. We keep
und,
seeing
wie eben
that in
schon
the
angesprochen,
newscasts. And
noch
like I
nicht
said
weit von
before,
hier
not far
am
away from
Berliner
here,
Hauptbahnhof.
by the
Wir sind
central
mit einer
station in Berlin.
Flüchtlingsbewegung historischen
This is
Ausmaßes
a refugee
konfrontiert.
movement of a
Dabei sind es in
historic
erster Linie die direkten
dimension. It is chiefly
Nachbarstaaten
the
der Ukraine, die in diesen
neighboring states
Tagen
of
mit
Ukraine
außerordentlicher
who
Solidarität
these days
Geflüchtete aufnehmen.
take
Es freut mich
refugees
sehr,
with
dass
enormous
unter den
solidarity.
heutigen
I'm so
Teilnehmenden
happy
auch
that
Alumni
amongst
und
the
Alumni aus
participants
Polen,
today, there are
der
also
Slowakei,
alumni from
Ungarn
Poland,
und Rumänien
Slovakia,
sind.
Hungary
Es ist wichtig,
and
in
Romania.
diesen
This is
Zeiten
important
Geschlossenheit zu
in these
zeigen.
days to
Und mein
show
Dank gilt allen,
that you have
ganz besonders
resolved
in den
together.
östlichen
My thanks goes
Nachbarstaaten,
to the
die sich
eastern
in diesen
neighboring
Tagen
states in
für die Menschen
particular
in der
who stand
Ukraine
up for
engagieren.
people in Ukraine.
Als DAAD
As the DAAD,
Als DAAD
As the
stehen wir
DAAD,
fest an der Seite
we
unserer
stand firmly by
Partner
the
und
side
der
of our
Menschen in der
partners
Ukraine.
and people
Gemeinsam
in
mit den
Ukraine,
deutschen
together
Hochschulen und den
with the German
Studierendenschaften
universities,
setzt sich
colleges
der
and
DAAD
students.
dafür ein, nach
DAAD stands
Deutschland
up
geflüchteten
for
Studierenden und
supporting
Forschende zu
students
unterstützen
and
und eine
researchers
Perspektive
who
zu
have
geben.
fled to Germany and to give them a
Aber in
perspective.
dieser dunklen Stunde zeigt
In
sich auch
these
das schon
dark
beinahe als
hours, it
selten
also
empfundene
shows
Bild eines geeinten
that the
Europas, das
rare
geschlossen
image of a
und
united
entschieden
Europe is
reagiert.
seen, that
Nicht
acts
zuletzt hat
with
der Angriff auf die
resolve
Ukraine
and
der
decisively.
gelebten
The
europäischen Solidarität
attack on
zu einer ganz
Ukraine
neuen
has
Bedeutung
boosted
verholfen.
the European
Liebe
solidarity, has
Alumni und
given it
Alumni,
new
das Ziel der
impact.
deutschen
The
G7-Präsidentschaft,
alumni,
in der wir
the
uns gerade
purpose of the German
befinden,
alumni
die
of
Rolle
the
der
German
G7 als
G7
Brückenbauer und
presidency
Vermittler
as
für Frieden
building
und
bridges,
Sicherheit
as
zu stärken.
brokering
Es hat sich
peace
gezeigt,
and
dass die
security. This
EU-Mitgliedstaaten
has
und die
shown
G7-Staaten
that
bei
the
internationalen
G7 states
Krisen
in
klar und
international
gemeinsam
crises
Position beziehen.
take a role
Die
together
Europäische Union
and
bekennt sich
clearly.
zu ihrer
The European
Verantwortung für
Union
die
stands by
Mitgestaltung
its
der globalen
responsibility for
Ordnung im
co-shaping
Sinne
the
von
European of the
stärkerer
global
internationaler
order
Koordinierung
by
und
more
Kooperation
international
sowie mehr
cooperation and
Nachhaltigkeit und
coordination and more
Solidarität. Auch
sustainability
Sie
and
werden im Rahmen
solidarity.
dieses
In
Treffens
the scope of
über
this
die
meeting,
zukünftige Rolle Europas
you will
in
also
der
be
Welt
talking about the
weiter
future role
debattieren.
of Europe.
Gleichzeitig erkenne ich in dieser Konferenz
Simultaneously, in this
selbst schon einen
conference myself,
gelebten
I can
European
see
Way
a
of Life. Ich
lived
sehe heute
European
Menschen
way
aus
of life, where people from
26 europäischen
26
Ländern vor
European
mir,
countries
die im Sinne
are
einer
ahead of me,
offenen,
are here
kritischen
with me,
Debatte
in the
zusammengekommen
sense of an
sind,
open
um sich
critical
zu den
debate, have
zentralen
come
Themen
together
unserer
to
Gegenwart
comment on the
auszutauschen
central
und gemeinsam
issues of the
konkrete
present day
Lösungsvorschläge
and
zu erarbeiten.
table common
Dass Sie
solution
alle als unsere
proposals.
Alumni
All
und
that as
Alumni
our
diese
alumni and
Veranstaltung
alumni, that
aktiv
all of you
als engagierte
actively
europäische
see this
Bürgerinnen und
as
Bürger unser
dedicated
aller
European citizens
in unserem
in
demokratischen,
our
freiheitlichen Europa
democratic,
mitgestalten,
free
erfüllt
and
mich,
liberal
erfüllt
Europe.
den
That
DAAD
makes us
mit
proud.
besonderer
That
Freude und
makes us
Stolz.
particularly
Sie
joyful.
diskutieren heute das
We'll
Europa
be
von
discussing
morgen
the Europe
unter
of
dem
tomorrow
Motto
under
Raus in
the
die Zukunft.
idea,
Wie bringen
get
wir
out into the
Europa voran?
future. Starting out for
Diese
the future,
Frage
how
werden
can
Sie
we
selbst
drive Europe
beantworten,
forward? You will answer
beantworten
this
müssen,
question yourselves.
aber ich
You will
wünsche
have
Ihnen
to, but I
allen für die
wish
kommenden
all of
Tage
you for the next
viel
few
Erfolg,
days
egal zu
all
welchen
success,
Antworten Sie
no
kommen,
matter
eine
what
fruchtbare
responses you
und
come up
lebhafte
with,
Diskussion
a fruitful and a
und uns
lively
allen ein
discussion,
gutes
and all
Gelingen.
of us
Herzlich willkommen und viel Erfolg.
all the best. Thank you, welcome, and have a successful meeting. Like Mr. Mukherjee said, it's about resilience, a word that people don't like. It's about ideas for the future of Europe. And on top of Mr. Mukherjee, there's someone else who would like to wish you all the best, who thinks of you when you're together here, and would also pick up ideas that you will be developing. So by video, we will hear the State Minister for Europe at the Foreign Office, Dr. Anna Lührmann.
Sehr geehrter Herr Professor
Dear
Mukherjee,
Professor Mukherjee,
liebe Kolleginnen und
dear
Kollegen des
colleagues
Europäischen Parlaments
from
und
the
des
European
Deutschen
Parliament and the
Bundestages,
German
vor allem
Bundestag,
aber
but above
liebe
all,
Alumni
dear
und Alumna
alumni and
des
alumni
DAAD aus ganz
of
Europa.
the DAAD from
Es ist
all
mir
over
eine
Europe.
ganz
It is a
besondere
great
Freude, Sie heute
pleasure
Abend
for
bei
me
diesem
to
ersten
welcome you on the
EU-weiten
occasion of this
Alumni-Treffen
first
des
EU-wide
DAAD
alumni
begrüßen zu
meeting
dürfen.
of the DAAD.
Es ist beeindruckend, dass
It is
heute hier
impressive that here today
DAAD-Alumni
we have
aus
DAAD
27
alumni from
europäischen Ländern
27
vertreten
European
sind. Ich finde es ganz
countries.
toll,
Well, with this
dass
is
durch die
terrific.
jahrzehntelange
Through decades of
kontinuierliche
continuous
Alumni-Arbeit des
alumni work
DAAD
of the
und das
DAAD
Engagement der
and the involvement of the
DAAD-Alumni-Vereine
DAAD alumni
Sie als ehemalige
associations,
Geförderte sich
you
nicht nur in ihren
as
Ländern,
previous
sondern nun auch grenzüberschreitend
grant
vernetzen und
receivers
kooperieren
are
können.
cross-border
Es freut mich, dass seitens der
connected and
deutschen
in cooperation. I'm so
EU-Ratspräsidentschaft so
happy
viele
that
dem Ruf
on
des
the basis
DAAD
of the
gefolgt sind
German
und
EU Council
nationale und
presidency,
regionale
so many have
EU-Ideenlabs
followed the
mit
call of
Alumni
DAAD
aus
and
insgesamt 12
together
Ländern organisiert haben.
organized that in
Ihr
12
Engagement
countries,
findet auch
the
darin
national
Ausdruck, dass bereits
regional
einige
EU
von Ihnen
labs.
ihre
The
ersten Projekte
involvement
in
is
zu Themen
backed
wie
up
dem
by
European
some
Green Deal,
having developed
Maßnahmen gegen
European Green
Populismus
Deal
oder
measures,
Umgang mit Flucht
measures
und
against
Migration
populism, or
entwickelt haben,
handling
die
flight
Sie
and
heute
migration,
Morgen
things,
und morgen
programs, ideas
präsentieren
that we
werden.
will be presenting today and
Zeichen
tomorrow.
für Austausch und Zusammenarbeit in Europa, wie Sie sie hier heute setzen, sind
Lighthouse for
gerade
exchange and
angesichts
cooperation
des
in
brutalen
Europe, as you're
Angriffs
setting it
Russlands
today,
auf die
is
Ukraine, der den Menschen
particularly
dort unendliches Leid bringt, umso
necessary
wichtiger.
in view of that brutal
Wir
aggression
unterstützen
of Russia on
gemeinsam
Ukraine,
die Ukraine
where
mit unseren
enormous
europäischen und
suffering is
internationalen
created.
Partnern,
We're
insbesondere im
supporting
Kreis der
Ukraine
NATO und der
together
G7.
with our other European and international
Gleichzeitig haben wir
partners
klar
of
gezeigt,
NATO and G7.
dass Russlands
Likewise,
eklatante
we've shown
Verletzung der
that
internationalen
Russia's
Ordnung nicht
blatant violation
unbeantwortet
of
bleibt.
international order
Deshalb
must
haben
not
wir
be
gemeinsam mit unseren Partnern
unanswered. That's why,
massive
together with our
wirtschaftliche und
partners,
finanzielle
we
Sanktionen
have
verhängt.
imposed massive
Aber auch
economic
in
and
unserer
financial sanctions.
Außenwirtschaftspolitik
But
müssen
also
wir Antworten
in
auf den Krieg
international
und
science
den Umgang
policy,
mit
we have to
Russland finden.
respond to the war
Dass wir
and
dabei
how
unseren
to
Partnerinnen
go
und
about
Partnern
with
in der
Russia.
Ukraine weiter
Of course,
eng
we
beistehen,
will
ist
stand closely
selbstverständlich.
by our partners
Nach
in
Deutschland
Ukraine. That goes
geflüchteten
without
Studierenden
saying.
und
Students and
Forschenden
researchers
müssen wir
that
eine
have fled
Perspektive
to
geben und
Germany
Unterstützung anbieten.
must be given a perspective.
Hier
They
sind
must
Bund,
be given
Länder,
support.
Hochschulen,
The Federation, the
Forschungsinstitutionen und letztlich
Länder,
wir alle gefragt.
the universities,
Gleichzeitig
research
wird die
institutions are
Zusammenarbeit in
called
Wissenschaft
upon
und
to
Forschung
act.
mit russischen
Likewise,
staatlichen Stellen
the
gegenwärtig
cooperation with
gestoppt
state
und kritisch
agencies in
überprüft.
science and research
Für
is
russische
stopped and critically
Wissenschaftlerinnen und
reviewed.
Wissenschaftler, die politisch
As
bedroht
regards
sind,
Russian
bleiben unsere
scientists who
Türen
are
indes
politically
weiterhin
under
offen.
threat, our
Denn
doors
Menschen,
remain
die uns in
open.
langjähriger Arbeit
People who
verbunden
over
sind und
many
jetzt
years have
mutig
been
ihre Stimme
associated
gegen den
with, where they
Völkerrechtsbruch ihrer
courageously
Regierung
stand up
erheben,
to
denen werden wir
voice
beistehen.
their opinion
Die
against
Stärkung der
the breach of
Zivilgesellschaft ist in
international law,
diesen Zeiten
they
das
will have
Gebot
our
der Stunde.
support.
Wir
Strengthening civil
beabsichtigen, den
society
Dialog
is the
in
order
den
of the day.
zivilgesellschaftlichen Strukturen
And
und in
civil society
Forschung in
structures
Russland
and
so weit wie
research
möglich
and science to be
fortzusetzen.
carried on in Russia as
Angesichts
far
dieses
as
Krieges und der
at
damit
all
verbundenen
possible.
Herausforderungen
In view
für
of
die
the war
Sicherheit
and the
unseres
associated
Kontinentes
challenges for
brauchen
the
wir umso mehr eine
security of the
aktive
continent,
Gestaltung
we
der
need all
Zukunft
the more
Europas
active
durch die
shaping
europäischen
of the future
Bürgerinnen
of
und
Europe by
Bürger.
European citizens.
Und es ist wichtig,
And one
dass wir
thing is
uns
important,
grenzüberschreitend
that across
zu unseren
border
gemeinsamen Zukunftsthemen
we exchange
austauschen,
views on
einander
our
zuhören
joint
und
future
voneinander lernen.
topics. We listen from one
Dies sind auch
another
die Grundgedanken der aktuell
and we
laufenden
learn from one
Konferenz zur
another.
Zukunft
These are the
Europas,
basic
einem
principles of
einzigartigen
the conference on the
gesamteuropäischen
future of Europe,
Dialogprozess,
a
in dem schon zahlreiche
pan-European
Bürgerinnen und
dialogue
Bürger
where
konkrete Vorschläge
numerous
für ihr Europa
citizens
für
have
morgen
tabled loads of
formuliert haben.
proposals
Als
for
Bundesregierung
Europe
unterstützen
of
wir diesen
tomorrow.
Prozess
As the federal
ausdrücklich
government, we
und setzen
expressly
uns für
support
dessen
this progress
erfolgreichen
and we
Abschluss ein.
stand up for its
Mit den
successfully
Ideenlabs wie
finding
mit
a
der Europäischen
conclusion.
Zukunftskonferenz
With the Ideas
schaffen wir
Labs and the Futures Conference,
europäische
we
Debattenräume
make
und tragen zur
European
Stärkung der
spaces for
europäischen
debates
Öffentlichkeit bei.
to be opened up and we
Den
strengthen the
Gedanken,
European
dass wir
public.
gemeinsam handeln und mit
The idea that
Entschlossenheit in
we're
die
acting
Zukunft schauen
together
müssen,
and with
Europa
resolve into
weiterzuentwickeln
the
und
future
stärker zu
to
machen,
develop Europe
das hat der
further.
DAAD
This is
im
something
Motto
the
dieses Treffens
DAAD
aufgegriffen.
has made as the motto
Raus
of
in die
our
Zukunft.
conference.
Wie kann
Out into the future.
wir
How
Europa
can we
voranbringen
move
oder wie
Europe
bringen wir Europa
forward?
voran? Ich bin
Well,
zuversichtlich,
I am
dass Sie in den
optimistic
kommenden Tagen
that in the next few
in einen
days we will
intensiven
be
Austausch
entering into an
mit Ihren
intensive
unterschiedlichen
idea
Meinungen,
with the
Hintergründen und
various
Erfahrungen
opinions and
sehr anregende
backgrounds
und
and
lebhafte
experiences. We will
Diskussionen zu
have
zentralen Fragen wie
exciting
dem
and lively
Klimaschutz, wie
discussions on
Europas Rolle in der
central
Welt
issues
und
such
auch
as
wie
climate protection,
Digitalisierung haben
Europe's
werden.
role in the world,
Diese
or
Veranstaltung bietet jedem
digitalization.
und jeder von
This event
Ihnen die
offers
Möglichkeit,
everyone
sich mit Ihren
the
eigenen Ideen, mit
opportunity
Ihrer Expertise
to
einzubringen, mit
contribute with their own ideas and with your expertise to come to terms with other perspectives
und die
and
Herausforderungen
ambitious
Europas
debate,
gemeinsam anzugehen.
and to
Bringen Sie sich
broach
also
the
mutig in die
challenges
Diskussion
of
ein
Europe together.
und lassen Sie
So, be
Europas
brave
Stimmenvielfalt
and
erklingen.
let the voices,
Für die
the diverse
Veranstaltungstage wünsche ich
voices
Ihnen
be heard.
lebendige
For the
und
days I
konstruktive
wish you
Diskussionen.
lively and
Ich bin sicher,
constructive discussion.
unser
I am
gemeinsames
sure
europäisches
our
Projekt
joint
wird von den
European
guten Ideen
project
der DAAD
will
Alumni
certainly
profitieren.
profit from the good ideas of DAAD alumni.
Also ja, man muss es sagen.
Well, we need to say an appeal to you, an incentivization to you to give everything, to be courageous and to contribute to the debate. We've heard, Mrs. Lehmann, the future of Europe is not something that happens by itself. We need to shape it actively. And she also said that in the scope, or it's rooted in the German EU presidency to organize these labs where alumni and alumni from different countries get together to develop ideas and concepts. And they have not only spent time somewhere in a closed room, but they want to present the results of what they have worked on, and they will be presenting it here. They looked into the major challenges, the challenges which were not war at the time, but they are climate change, they are consumption, the challenges linked to right-wing populism. And on these topics, there was a DAAD Idea Lab, and we now welcome Katharina Schlepper and Nora Regisch to tell us something about that. But first of all, we start with a little video clip that shows us some insights into the work.
Konfliktfähigkeit zu stärken gehört für mich als einer der wesentlichen Punkte ganz an die Spitze.
Es grassiert ja immer noch der Spruch, Ehre den Anfängen. Dieser Spruch ist schon lange nicht mehr gültig, sondern es ist eher die Frage während der Normalisierung.
Diese Tagung beschäftigte sich ja mit der Frage demokratische Zivilgesellschaft unter Druck, wenn Rechtspopulismus mächtig wird. Und sie zielte eben darauf, einen Austausch zu haben, damit wir überhaupt die richtigen Fragen entwickeln.
Aus dem Lab letzten Sommer hatte sich die Idee ergeben, einen Wissenschaftsverbund oder Verband zu begründen, um akademische Freiheit innerhalb von Europa zu fördern, weil sich eben gezeigt hat, dass akademische Freiheit auch innerhalb von Europa in manchen Staaten bedroht ist. Und das war die Grundidee, an der wir gearbeitet haben. Daraus hat sich so eine Art Projektidee entwickelt. Wir brauchen PartnerInnen, wir brauchen Leute, die Lust haben, sich für das Projekt zu engagieren, teilzunehmen und das eben auch weiterzuentwickeln. Und ja, im Idealfall können wir dann bald loslegen.
Unser Workshop hat sich ja dezidiert sozusagen mit der europäischen Demokratiebildung im schulischen Kontext beschäftigt. Das bedeutet, wir müssen Lehrerinnen aus-, weiter- und fortbilden im Bereich Demokratiebildung weiterhin. Zweitens müssen wir uns die schulischen Strukturen kritisch anschauen, reflektieren, inwiefern dort Ungleichheiten, Diskriminierung und Rassismus vielleicht sogar fortgeschrieben werden. Und drittens, wir müssen natürlich die Schülerinnen in den Fokus nehmen, wir müssen sie zu selbstreflexivem Handeln erziehen und dann müssen wir vor allen Dingen auch mit den Schülerinnen zusammen eine Vision von Demokratie und Demokratiebildung in Europa aufbauen.
Der Schwerpunkt unserer Veranstaltung war die Idee, dass politische Bildung gerade in der Kombination, also als Fusion mit Kunst und Kultur besonders fruchtbar sein könnte und nochmal andere Menschen, andere Personengruppen auf anderer Ebene, vielleicht emotionaler Ebene erreichen kann.
Und, ein erster Impuls kann eben ein überregionales, ein europäisches Netzwerktreffen von politischen BildnerInnen und Kulturschaffenden sein.
Educators and creative artists.
Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren,
ladies, gentlemen, my name is Nora Regisch, the second person that was mentioned earlier in the presentation, and my idea was that the alumni and alumni
Event teilzunehmen. Hier hatten wir den
should take
Fokus auf die
part in the
demokratische
DAAD Alumni and
Zivilgesellschaft
Friends
unter Druck
activities.
gestellt, dabei
We wanted to
insbesondere
look at
das
European
Thema
initiatives against right-wing
Rechtspopulismus
populism,
angegangen.
pressure on civil
Mit einem Fokus
society.
auf Deutschland,
Just a focus on
Österreich und
Germany,
Ungarn
Austria and
wurde in
Hungary.
diesem Ideenlab
We
sowohl der
have
Druck von
worked
rechts
in that
in
ideal
verschiedenen
lab
Bereichen wie
in the
Wissenschaft,
field of
Kunst und Kultur,
science, arts,
Medien
culture,
analysiert,
media, and
als auch
looked
die
at the
Strategien der
pressure
Gegenwehr
from
angeschaut
right-wing
und
populist movements. And we
Handlungsmöglichkeiten
wanted to
erarbeitet.
see how to
Ein
counteract
Thema in
these
unserem
different
Workshop
trends. One topic in our workshop
hatten wir den Fokus auf die Universitäten
set the
gelegt
focus
und
rather
auf
on
der Grundlage von
universities
zwei
and on the basis of two
Präsentationen, eine
presentations,
aus Ungarn und
one
andere
coming
aus
from
Amerika,
Hungary, the other one
haben wir
from
uns
the
dieser
US.
Idee des
We
Europäischen
then looked at that
Wissenschaftsbundes
concept of a
namens
scientific
Voices
network or research
ausgearbeitet.
association which
Das
is called Voices.
Hauptziel
The main objective of
dieses Verbundes, dieses
the
Netzwerkes ist
network, that
es,
association,
eine Plattform
is
zur
to create
Vernetzung
a
und
platform for
Unterstützung zu
networking and
bieten,
for providing
Wissenschaftlerinnen
support,
und
scientific
Wissenschaftler
researchers
aller Fachrichtungen
of all
und aller
disciplines
Karrierestufen,
and all
die zu
levels of the
Forschungsfeldern
career
arbeiten, die in
hierarchy
ihrem
that work in
Heimatland
research
gefährdet
fields
sind.
that are endangered in their home
Hier könnten
countries should be
Sie
taken
zu diesen
together.
Forschungsfeldern austauschen,
They
sich
will
informieren
be using
und
this platform
weiterbilden.
as an exchange platform
Mit Hilfe
and
externer
to
Förderung,
receive
die wir dann
further
natürlich
education
dann noch
and
morgen gerne weiter ausarbeiten
possibilities
würden
to further
und
develop
interne
their careers. So of
Unterstützungsangebote
course we
sollte man
provide
ermöglichen
support
oder zumindest
services
dazu
and we want
beitragen,
to
dass
contribute
man
to making
Wissenschaft
sure that
möglichst
scientific research
vorurteilsfrei
can be
betreiben und die Erkenntnisse
done
der
in an
Wissenschaft
unbiased
kommunizieren kann.
way, and that
Solche
scientific
Unterstützungsangebote können sein
findings
die
can be
Bildung von
communicated in an unbiased
Forschungsgruppen
way.
und
So we could, for
Publikationsorganen,
example, help
Fortbildungen,
to
Fernlehre und
organize
Fernlernen,
different meetings, workshops,
Stipendien
help
auch
publications
Kooperation und
be
Transferangebote von
published
solchen
and transfer
wissenschaftlichen
offerings and
Erkenntnissen
services
Richtung
of scientific
Öffentlichkeit und Richtung
findings from
Politik.
from academia towards
Das alles haben wir in
policymakers
diesem
and the
Juni-Workshop
general
schon
public could be
erarbeitet.
fostered.
Nach den
All of that
Workshop-Phasen
has been
konnten die
developed
Ideen
during our
ermittelt
workshop
werden,
in
die
June. We have been
besonders
able to
ausbau- und anschlussfähig
identify
war. Da waren
concepts
wir sehr
that
froh,
were
dass unsere
particularly
Idee
viable
unterstützt
and
wurde.
could be
Wir
used,
hatten,
and we
wie in
got
dem
broad
Video auch
support.
gezeigt,
We're
auch
very happy
weitere
about
zwei
that.
Ideen
We have
ausgewählt.
identified
Eine
two
geht um die Bildung
additional
für
ideas and concepts, as you
Demokratieverständnis
see in the
in
video
europäischen
clip.
Schulen
One
und das
is
andere
focused
europäische
on
Ansätze
civic
der
education in
aufsuchenden
schools,
politischen
and
Bildung mittels Kunst und
a
Kultur.
second one
Aber ich möchte
focuses
nun das Wort an
on
Katharina
civic
Schlepper,
education
meiner
based on
Kollegin, geben,
creativity
die über
and
die
creative
Ergebnisse
artists.
unserer
But I would like to
Folgeveranstaltung, die
pass
im Februar
on
stattgefunden hat,
to
kurz
my
berichtet
colleague.
und die
She's going to
Konkretisierung
report
unserer Ziele
on the
erläutert. Danke.
different results and findings of our workshops and the specific results.
Ja, danke schön. Hallo auch von mir.
Hello from my
mein Name ist
side.
Katharina Schlepper.
My
Ich
name
bin
is
DAAD
Katharina
Alumna
Schlepper.
aus
I am a
Deutschland.
DAAD alumni
Und
from
ich werde jetzt ganz kurz was
Germany,
zu unseren
and I would like to
Folgeveranstaltungen
briefly
und zur
talk about the
Genese unserer
follow-up
Ideen erklären.
events, the
Und zwar die
genesis of our
Folgeveranstaltungen
ideas.
zum
The follow-up
DAAD-Workshop
events,
wurden mit
as a
Hilfe des
result of our DAAD
DAAD-Freundeskreises
workshop, were
sowie auch von uns, von den
organized with
Teilnehmenden
the help
und
of
Alumna
the
und
DAAD
Alumni
Alumni and
selbst
Friends
organisiert.
Association. We
Neben der Arbeit an
self-organized all
unseren
of that.
Ideen hatten
Alongside
wir auch die
the work on
Möglichkeit,
our ideas and
ExpertInnen
concepts, we also had the
einzuladen und
possibility to
somit auch
invite
mögliche
experts to
Ansatzpunkte für
our
unsere
workshop
Ideen und Projekte
that
noch
helped us
zusätzlich zu
to
identifizieren.
identify
Wie
additional
Nora schon
points of
erklärt hat,
departure for
starteten
our
wir mit
concepts.
einem
As
sehr
Nora has
großen
explained, we
Problem,
started with a
mit dem die
major
EU konfrontiert
complex
ist
of
und
problems that
analysierten
the
Lösungen
EU
auf
is
sehr
confronted
verschiedenen
with
Leveln
and
und Ebenen. Nach dem
sought
Lab
to
im Sommer
develop
und in den
solutions at various levels. After the
Folgeveranstaltungen
lab
haben
in
sich
summer
unsere
and the
Ideen
follow-up
speziell
events, our
weiterentwickelt und
ideas
sind
have
teilweise
developed in a
schon
more
sehr
specific
ausgereift.
manner and
Das
are
gilt nicht nur
quite
für
mature
unsere
now.
Gruppe,
This is
sondern
not
auch für
only
die
true
zwei
for my
weiteren
group,
Gruppen.
but also for the
Unsere
two
Idee
additional
hat sich
groups
aus der
that have worked.
Fragestellung
So
entwickelt,
we have
welche
developed our
Hilfestellung
concepts
für
based on the
Hochschulen und
question as to what
wissenschaftliche
support can be given
Einrichtungen
to
unter dem Druck von
universities and
Rechtspopulismus
scientific
geleitet werden kann.
institutions that find themselves under pressure
Durch das
of
Lab und die
right-wing groups.
Folgeveranstaltungen
As
zeigte
a
sich
result of the lab
allerdings,
and the follow-up
dass nicht nur
events, however,
Rechtspopulismus
also
eine
seen that
Bedrohung
it's
für die
not only
wissenschaftliche
right-wing
Freiheit
populism
darstellt
that
und das Problem
is
auf
a threat
unterschiedlichen Ebenen
to
besteht.
freedom in
Auch
academia,
zum
but that
Beispiel
the problem
neoliberale,
exists at different levels. For
neoliberaler
example,
Druck oder andere
neoliberal
Möglichkeiten gibt es,
pressures
die
or
wissenschaftliche
other
Freiheit
pressures may
einzuschränken.
endanger
Zudem
or
können wir dieses
limit
Problem nicht nur auf die EU
academic
beziehen,
freedom. And we
sondern wir
cannot
müssen
only
alle europäischen Länder
identify that problem
mitdenken.
at the
Das
European
zeigt sich ja
Union
jetzt
level,
auch
but we
gerade
need to
in
also
unserer aktuellen Situation,
include
wo wir sehen,
other
dass
countries in
Europa
Europe and
natürlich natürlich weitergeht als nur die EU. Genau, wie gesagt, wir haben die Idee dann ein bisschen konkretisiert und wir sind angekommen bei unserem Projekt Voices, das Nora schon erwähnt hat. Dieses Projekt soll Hilfe auf institutioneller, aber auch individueller Ebene anbieten und sich an WissenschaftlerInnen aus allen europäischen Ländern richten. welche mit einer Einschränkung der Wissenschaftsfreiheit zu kämpfen haben. Akademische Freiheit ist in der EU-Grundrechtscharta in Artikel 13, wenn ich mich nicht täusche, festgehalten. Und das darf nicht als gegeben hingenommen werden, dass die einfach aufrechterhalten werden kann, sondern sie muss im Einklang mit unseren europäischen Werten gestärkt und aktiv gefördert werden. So, wir hoffen jetzt, dass wir dann morgen schön an der Idee weiterarbeiten können und wir freuen uns auch auf die ganzen anderen Ideen, die wir noch zu hören bekommen. Vielen Dank.
Incorporate all other ideas that might come from you as a group into the work that has already been done.
Ja, danke schön.
Right, thank you to both of you. Indeed, sounds rather concrete. I look forward to its development further on. Let's take up another issue which doesn't stop at EU borders, i.e. climate change. I'll have to watch out. Is it correct if I call it climate change? Shouldn't I say climate catastrophe? For it to be worthwhile checking the words, the metaphors that we use in this context. Professor Balin Forgac will be talking about this. He is, so to speak, the winner of the Ideas Lab in Hungary. Welcome.
Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you. So, yeah, thank you. So I'm one of the generations who was taught about climate change in elementary school, which was about 30 years ago. Yet the problem we face today is far greater than it was back then. Why? One of the main reasons is that climate science has been under enormous pressure. Fossil fuel interests have hired entire armies of lawyers, PR spin doctors, and lobbyists to protect their imaginary interests. And along the way, they changed immensely the way we talk and think about climate change. Our thinking is still being distorted by tobacco-style disinformation campaigns, which poison our public discourse, even though the PR strategies have been updated and more shrewd nowadays. Climate scientists' entire careers were destroyed, and in response, they engaged in swift reputation management. So perhaps even our science is distorted. Climate models have been systematically under-predicting what is in store for us. And the talk about climate models has been adapted to business and political negotiations to fit the taste of these contexts by including optional scenarios and inexistent technologies, as if physics were negotiable. Nature does not make concessions, however. Our climate, instead of gradually changing, may rapidly, suddenly, and irreversibly shift into a different phase, a hothouse state, which may simply preclude large-scale agriculture and farming, risking technological society and civilization. The 1.5 degrees threshold is no guarantee to avoid a tipping cascade and shift into this dire state, and instead simply live with the constant natural disasters the current models are predicting for us. So why are we still using metaphors and language so inefficient and insufficient to address the problem? We talk in euphemisms, we use positive words, we talk in passive expressions, and use magical buzzwords. But why not talking about the furnace effect instead of greenhouse effect, or global burning, global blazing, or global heat death instead of the polite global warming? Warmth, green, and change are positive words, but we are really in the red in a deadly problem. And instead of using even catastrophe or breakdown or collapse, we could use active terms, as we are not passive sufferers and not passive actors in this. We could talk about destruction, overkill, or suicide. And we could give away with the magical buzzwords that mostly justify sustained emissions. International summits on meaningful and miniature numbers make the problem seem ridiculous for non-experts. So why to shift a more categorical climate language? Climate destruction is not future bad weather, but it's currently happening now in the form of death and destruction. The gradual approaches that have been on offer in the past 30 years have mostly timed out, and they are insufficient for the next 30 years. Words are just words, are not enough unless they change political discourse, and through that they become law and policy. Action is a form of communication when we are talking about climate communication. So framing is the substance. Climate change is a time bomb, but paradoxically, the 5 to 10 years we have left, predicted by the IPCC, is a lot of time to act. Mostly, it's luxury we need to abandon, not a Puritan lifestyle we need to adapt, as most technology are available for us. And why short-term profit needs to mean losing our entire home planet. So thank you very much for your your attention.
Ja, vielen Dank.
Right, thank you so much for the passionate presentation, which has shown and made clear where the crossroads are, where we stand concerning climate. The big question is, how will we make it work in the 5 to 10 years? Where do we begin? The best thing, we begin with ourselves, at ourselves, so that every one of us can do something to live more sustainably. And ideas on how to handle that have been come up by Michaela Voiner from Romania. Michaela Voiner, she's the winner of the Idea Labs there, and she deals with shaping who you are for a sustainable future.
So hello everyone, my name is Michaela Voina and I'm a proud DAAD alumni with a background in psychology and cognitive science. So, how often have you bought clothes you never wore? The Pareto principle applies not only to wealth, but also to wearing clothes, meaning most people only wear about 20% of their clothes regularly, while they hardly ever wear the other 80%. For some, it has financial implications, while for others, the simple fact that they can afford buying things makes them easily dismiss their value. Do you think Johnny Depp and Rihanna are wearing their clothes until they're worn down? I don't think so. The fashion industry is the second largest polluter after oil and gas, and it accounts for about 10% of the global carbon emissions and for about 20% of wastewater, according to the United Nations. It is no surprise that we are negatively affecting the environment. So why are we engaging in such behaviors that are negatively affecting our environment? And these behaviors are characterized by overconsumption. I will present you 3 main reasons for this. It's about what we've learned through repetition. And we've learned that indulging into buying now, it's good for us. It also feels good. That dopamine spike. Popular slogans have constantly emphasized it. Then marketing does what it needs to do, and frugality is sold as a form of self-oppression. Sadly, companies are mostly focusing and caring about increasing their sales. They also mask their intentions by shifting responsibility to consumers and by greenwashing. And greenwashing, while obviously unacceptable, is a sign that people's value have the potential of shaping their behaviors and also the political and business scenes. We also think that acquiring material things will impress others, will make us look good, and will also create a common ground for connection based on similar brands. However, what we might really be after is a friend that likes us irrespective of our possessions. I'm not preaching against buying things we need, but about buying things that are environmentally friendly and thus urging companies to produce so. So what can we do? We know that behaviors and habits can be learned, unlearned, and relearned through education and behavioral tracking. We also know that change at an individual level is very important for shaping the social cultural mentality. However, this is not enough. We need to go to the next level and also influence the community level by persuading people that we know personally. And also, let's remember that corporations are not something abstract. They are made of individuals and controlled by individuals like you and me who make decisions every day. So let's also put pressure on those powerful decision makers that have the potential and the power to shape politics, economics, and businesses. This should not be negotiable, nor another opportunity for us to look good on the surface without proper action. Playing a ping-pong game of responsibility and shifting responsibility from corporations to individuals didn't take us very far. Let's not be naive and think that we can buy our way out of climate destruction. Instead, let us adopt sustainable behaviors that would benefit not only the relationship with ourselves and others, but also the relationship with our environment and with the other species that are sharing the planet with us. Let us relearn that happiness and meaning can be achieved differently by creating strong and genuine connections with those around us. Thank you.
Ja, ganz herzlichen Dank, Michaela Woyna aus Rumänien, die uns aufruft, an uns selbst erstmal zu arbeiten, um möglicherweise von unten nach oben was zu verändern, also die Ebenen von unten nach oben durchzugehen. Was Ähnliches hören wir gleich, kommen wir gleich zu, denn wir wollen jetzt über Probleme.
Right now we'll be talking about problems that go beyond that possibly. We talked about right-wing populism and resistance of civil society. We talked about sustainability. How will we handle the issues of migration of refugees in the EU? In view of the war, this gains new significance also for climate change inside the EU. What role does the EU want to play, or will it need to play in the world? The education and research space can contribute. These are the four big topics we'll be addressing here during the panel discussion, but not only up here. This is the opportunity also for you to participate. We'll try after each of the input blocks that we'll go for to have the option here to ask questions. So if in the plenary meeting you're interested in, there's a microphone over here, just go to the mic and we'll try and play the ball to you so that you can voice your ideas and your thoughts. And as I said, also you at home in the live stream do have the option to do so. You can register your ideas as well in the chat. They are collected, moderated, and then played over to us to the stage, and we'll try the one or other of your ideas to be interspersed so that we have a great and beautiful exchange and a discussion here in the best sense of the word. So let me introduce my guests. I'm very happy to have Chantal Kopf. She's an MP of Bündnis 90 The Greens. She studied politics in Freiburg, wanted to become a journalist, and she felt, oh, politics is fun. She can change something, she noticed, and that is she stayed on course. And I checked it up yesterday. She did have a DAAD connection. She was in Indonesia for a teaching and research project. She's the first directly Green Freiburg member of Parliament, so she's new in the Bundestag, she says. She's still 26. So her birthday is not far away. Frau Kopf, do join me here. And yes, wonderful applause. Then I have a quote from you. We Europeans will long be measured by how we responded to the massive international law violation by Russia. She's right about that. We'll talk about it. Great to have you. We have Udo Bullmann. He's also a political scientist. I can say he's been a while in the parliaments. He was in the college context, and he was professor for European studies at Gießen University. and he dealt with these levels of politics quite intensely. How does that go together, the small things, the big things? What are the levels? Since 1999, he has been in the European Parliament, so he has long experience. He was head of the European Social Democrats parliamentary group. He's in the Development Committee now, and he says cohesion and sovereignty have pushed forward in the EU on account of the Ukraine war, and the exchange of alumni and colleges play a key role. Welcome, Herr Bullmann. And then I hope we have on the phone Siegfried Mureșan. He is a Romanian EU Parliament member. He studied economics in Bucharest and DAAD sponsored at Humboldt University. He also worked in the Bundestag, and he speaks perfect German. I'm happy to have him from Brussels. We can see him, we can hear him. Since 2015, a member of the EVP parliamentary group, he's deputy chair of the budget committee, and a few days ago, with 80 colleagues from the parliament, he stood up for an import stop for Russian gas. The German government sees it differently so far. Great to have you here, Mr. Mureșan. Good evening to you. And you've seen him, Mr. Mukherjee, you've seen him, he'll join us here. He studied English, biology, and education in Aachen. He has been teaching since 2003 in Gießen at the university there, where in 2009 he became the president. So on the one hand, he is at the helm of a German university since 2020, also president of the DAAD. He has been such for a while. So great to have him here, and he can tell us a lot about what discrepancies there have been and issues there have been in the in the college context. It is a tight walk. I think some have suffered from it. Also how it is handled by the DAAD, something to talk about. A great welcome. Right. European values were mentioned a couple of times. Frau Kopf, I said so. You've been in the Bundestag recently only. This is a challenge in normal times to find your way around that. Now, within a few weeks only, everything, or lot, has turned upside down, where we thought for decades that it would work that way. So a personal question, how do you experience these days? I said so. We'll be measured by that as the European Union, how we'll handle it. Do you feel we're handling it well, that the EU is handling it well? Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here with your different perspectives, talking about that with a team. You asked how I personally experienced recent weeks. Well, after the recent regular week in February, I went home to February. I did expect we would have a special meeting because war was in Europe. That is simply unimaginable, inconceivable for us as MPs, a totally new situation. And certainly also for long-term MPs as well. I do European policy myself. I'm in the European Union Committee. The influence of Europe is dear to my heart, and it's painful when you see war in Europe, and you need to talk about that every day, every hour. This is still breathtaking. The only positive thing is that the current situation shows that Putin did not manage to split and separate the West or Europe. On the contrary, we moved together better and more. And we talked about the European Union fitness to act, the capacities in foreign policy, for instance. And I feel that many would not have expected that the EU manages so swiftly and with such resolve to respond to the Russian aggression. In the shortest possible time, massive packages of push of pressure on the Russian business have been managed, and not only the European Union, also, say, Switzerland, for instance, imposes and implements EU sanctions. So as Europeans in these difficult times, we are moving closer together, and this will carry on for a while. You said similar things. This is a push that we have seen for cohesion. Were you surprised by this, that there was that unity? Well, says Herr Bullmann, we did not expect that such a point would touch it off. Many had hoped that what's happening now could be avoided. They would say it's rule out that in the midst of Europe such cruelties by the Russian invasion could occur. Personally, the House of Democracy, the European Parliament, has hardly or ever been seen with so much resolve and cohesion and togetherness in these hours where it became clear what it would be, what it means. And the colleagues in the European Parliament are amongst those who move it forward in these hours, that we become even more in solidarity with the victims, that we get going the assistance and the rescue operation. And there's a clear majority to support Ukraine with arms so that it can defend itself, that it's not overwhelmed by the massive war-like brutality from previous centuries that we have seen happen. And like I said in the moderation, there's a clear announcement that vis-à-vis refugees that seek protection, we show solidarity. A mechanism has been installed, finally has been installed, I would say, of which we hope that also the climate of our refugee policy will change that also vis-à-vis future catastrophes. So first rescue, first aid for cross-border migrants, for refugees. Yes, there is something like a new situation. The European Union has grown from mastering, compensating the wounds from World War II. This was the push of the generation to build the European institutions at the time. We had always hoped that such causes would never come up and would never be needed to step up the quality of Europe further. We're experiencing an unwanted situation, which probably is another leap forward in terms of the quality, with European unanimity, with European resolve and resolution and togetherness, unfortunately against this backdrop. Would you say, Mr. Bullmann steps our senses, if I understand it right? Mr. Mureşan, you're in the same parliament. What is your perception in Brussels? Everything that Bodo has said, I would subscribe to that, I would support that. As the European Union and as the European Parliament, in times of crises, we have always been together. 2 years ago, when the corona pandemic began, within weeks did we take first measures that truly showed an effect. For instance, the rule when taking EU subsidy funds that the governments could use these funds where they were needed in getting protection material and procuring masks. That is something that has helped member states of the European Union very much. 10, 12 years ago, economic and financial crisis, the European Union at the time did not leave any country alone that was in troubles. Greece, Spanish banking, Portugal, Cyprus, Ireland, all of them were supported by the European Union in solidarity, and it worked. Brexit, from day one, after the decision of the UK to leave the European Union, unfortunately, until the end of the negotiations, we were all in agreement and we all defended the rights of the citizens of the 27 members of the European states with respect to those living in the UK. In days of crisis, we always stand together, but it will be important now, over the next few months, to further be in agreement. Many measures, many decisions yet need to be taken in the maximum. We need support for Ukraine, maximum cost to the Russian Federation, and above all to the leadership of the Russian Federation, and clearly we also need to face the consequences for us, for the European Union and the member states of the European Union, including the economic fallout. but also for the many Ukrainian citizens who come to us who need our assistance. That cost, that burden will have to be shouldered, of course, by all of us. We can do it together only. Yes, we are agreed. It will be important for the overall situation further to be assessed together, that we're all aware that from Russia, for all of us, for the European Union, there is a danger that comes from there, that emanates. We're aware of that risk and this danger. We remain united, we stand together, and we talk about the next steps and questions, and then decide as well. Thank you. The consequences, we mentioned them. Mr. Mukherjee, in the sense of the DAAD, how do you experience that? What consequences does it have for you?
For the DAAD and its work, yes, well, what Chancellor Scholz has described as a big change of times that affects us all as citizens, as well as the DAAD with their acting. But it also it does not affect the basics of the German Academic Exchange Service. We stand for change as a result of exchange. We want to foster cooperation. These principles do not change. But after that aggression from the sides of Russia on Ukraine, we have to respond, and that's what has been done by the entire community of academic researchers, which means that the joint projects with Russian partners have been frozen, have been suspended. We don't send any funds to Russia anymore. There is no mobility from Germany to Russia that is financed anymore. All the financial, political, institutional contacts have been suspended, which means that the sanctions that have been imposed by the European Union and Germany are supported by us, and we act in compliance with these sanctions. That's one of the guidelines. And the second one is that within academia and within the scientific researchers communities, we keep the channels for discussions open. This is the silence diplomacy. And we have lots of scientific researchers and students from Russia at our German universities. Of course, we don't send them back home. They are part of our university community. Many of them have a critical standpoint towards Putin and his government. They are very courageous, and we clearly need to distinguish between those critical voices that need to be strengthened. There is an enormous potential in the scientific community, in academia, including in Russia. I remind you of the petition that more than 7,000 scientific researchers have signed against that war of aggression, where they have expressed their view against their own state as a state of pariah that Russia has turned into. So the basic principles of the German academic exchanges have not changed, not even after 100 years. But of course, we respond to the current developments, and our solidarity is now directed towards Ukraine, where we need to provide support, where we need to give help and aid, especially those Ukrainians that come to Germany to seek shelter and that, of course, want to continue their education and studies at German universities, that want to continue their scientific research. So many of the Ukrainians are in the direct neighboring states of Ukraine, in Poland, in the Czech Republic, in the Slovak Republic, in Romania. We need to support them as well, and we need to learn a lot from how our friends in the eastern neighboring states deal with that difficult situation, because we will be seeing increasing numbers of refugees as well, and we need to stand side by side in that scientific community. Well, that means also that we need to continue to share our values and exchange about our values. Mrs. Kopf, in the plenary session of the German parliament, you have heard this morning the address by the Ukrainian president, Mr. Zelensky. The European Union always points to the common European values that need to be defended, and Zelensky expressed his criticism towards Germany. He would want to see more and expect more support and help from Germany. Would you say that we do not stand sufficiently up for our values here, that we do not represent them sufficiently? Well, it's always necessary, and that's what is being done, to examine and see time and time again how far we have advanced and how far we have developed ourselves in order, for example, to become more autonomous and independent with regard to our supply of energies. That's a long and tedious process, but it's important not to lean back and be happy with what has been achieved, but to continue moving forward, and that's what is being done. There are things where we think it's politically not smart, not intelligent. For example, the discussion around Ukraine joining the European Union. Of course, I understand this desire, this urgent desire of many Ukrainians to be a member of the European Union because they feel European and they stand for European values. But the question is what helps in this current situation and what might be just a symbol that makes the situation even worse, more difficult, and what gives rise to false hopes. That's something we should avoid as the European Union, as Germany, to give rise to hopes that later on then would be bitterly disappointed, and to organize that process of joining the European Union. That is a fixed and stipulated process. There are other states in Europe that have high expectations, for example, the Western Balkans, and this affects and touches upon geopolitical questions. And if we then sort of push back other states that have been involved in that process for much longer already, it will be bad too. So it's a difficult situation with lots and lots of elements that need to be combined. Of course, we want to show all our solidarity with Ukraine, but we should not sort of slide into decisions that are emotional decisions and that deteriorate or may deteriorate the current situation. So it's a very fine line that we need to walk here. And it is not a simple thing to decide. We feel that every day and we feel that very heavily. And that was something that was made very clear yesterday when we discussed the Ukrainian situation. And of course, with the video message this morning by President Zelensky, we felt it even more. Well, I would like to ask Mr. Mureşan, the Ukraine has asked to become a member of the EU as quickly as possible. There's also the Republic of Moldova and Albania that have asked for the same thing, adherence to the European Union. You are a member of the European Union Parliament that looks into Moldova. Well, I see it as follows. Within the member states of 27 members, we can only live in security and stability if in our direct neighborhood all the neighboring countries are stable, robust as well, and live in peace. And this is why Ukraine, when it comes to security policy, is very important for us. And the same goes for the Republic of Moldova, a country which in the east of Romania is a neighboring country of the European Union. So to defend these countries in order to have stability and security in Europe. For example, we see in Moldova a president who is very much in favor of European standards and values, and to really get engaged to making sure that this country could join is as much important as the fact that we want to make sure that there is security and stability within the European Union. Second point, if the people in Ukraine say that they want to have a European perspective because they see themselves as European citizens, if they want to join the EU, if President Zelensky in these very difficult times now signs the document for becoming a member state of the European Union, then the response of the EU can only be one, and it is, yes, you're welcome. You are European, you are part of us, and you're part of the European Union. That is the first and most important point. This European perspective that we as the European Parliament have adopted in a resolution with a large majority, and that resolution was adopted 10 days ago. So it is a perspective for Ukraine. But what does that mean, a European perspective? It does not mean that Ukraine is a member today or tomorrow. It will not be a member overnight, but it means that membership of Ukraine within the European Union is viable. It can be imagined, but until that point in time, on both sides, on the side of the European Union as on the Ukrainian side, a lot still needs to be done. There are lots of obstacles that need to be overcome. But what do we need as a better proof to show that the people in Ukraine are happy and willing to overcome obstacles than what they do right now? They fight for European values. They defend their country and European values. So that's why I say that Ukraine will not be a member state tomorrow, but we need to start working towards that ambition and that goal today in order to prepare the ground for adherence. And when it comes to the Western Balkans states, well, that may lead to disappointment in the countries of the Western Balkans, let me say the following. Right now, we have not made any promise to Ukraine. We have not opened up any perspective to Ukraine which would not have already been made as a promise or perspective to most of the countries of the Western Balkans. Most of these countries of the Western Balkans already enjoy the status of a EU candidate state. We have started negotiating with them regarding their joining the EU. Ukraine has not come to that point yet. Ukraine has just applied for membership. There will be several stages. At some point, Ukraine will receive the candidate status, then we will start negotiations, and then sometime later, negotiations will be concluded. So the countries in the Western Balkans should not be concerned or worried that we have a faster process for Ukraine than for other countries such as Northern Macedonia or others. Within the European Union, they are as welcome as Ukraine. Well, thank you very much. It's a good perspective, but it's not a shortcut into the EU. Mr. Bullmann, let me take another look towards the European Union and how it may possibly change. Let me take a look towards President Macron, who thinks about more sovereignty, more strategic autonomy, and has been working towards that objective for much longer, but has not been able to really reach that goal. When we now look at the result and outcome of the summit in Versailles last weekend and analyze that, he seems to be making a step forwards. Is that the EU that is more autonomous, that can defend itself much better?
Well, first, let me comment regarding Mr. Murchan. I share his view regarding the security situation. And what he may explain is that the clear commitment is not the final date of Ukraine joining. It's about a clear commitment to have a path, a joint way that must be spoken and uttered clearly. The forms will follow. They will find forms for that. I'll move over to your question direct. A different European Union will be that after the war, the European Union will have to change, which begins with a question like we've negotiated it for the new federal government. I had the privilege to write and negotiate the European chapter for my party. We all stood up for a joint common security policy, for a common European defense policy that does not split the world in good and bad, that has a comprehensive, humane security concept and carries that into the world, and will shape Europe accordingly, but which also clearly says that they have the means to defend themselves and to protect the people. This commitment, so to speak, is an underlying foundation of the new federal government. What Olaf Scholz has done under the pressure of the events is to say that's what we stand for, and we will not take the small change. No, we'll be persisting in pursuing that course. That's the response to my first part of the question, but that will only be possible as a defense position in the scope of the European position, in the cooperation with the European friends, in the shared responsibility of a European foreign and security policy. Otherwise, our claim of shaping global Europe, Frau von der Leyen said a global commission is what she would lead. That coalition could not be brought about. Yes, hopefully, yes, we are taking part in the discussion quite energetically. Hopefully there will be a thrust towards more European sovereignty. Yet we'll need to talk about what it means, European sovereignty. We don't want to be erring as if security policy could be pursued like in the previous century, in a national kind of definition, nationalistic definition. We want to be an international actor. We want to pursue peacefulness and multilateralism. This is what we'll promote. We'll have to discuss what the shift in the East-West relationship means for our relationship to the global South. we've seen in the vote in the United Nations, the question mark here or there, even with this great common resolve, we have seen question marks here and there. I'm motivated by the labs, the ideas labs, the wonderful examples that we could benefit from. You described what aura we've got here prevailing in this great location. But looking at the labs and the reports from the colleagues, you feel right away the dynamic that arises through the critical, liberal mind that is organized across the border. That's the movements. That is the push in energy that the European Union needs to become what it can become and what will be the response to the crisis. You heard about unanimity, resolution. That should not deceive us that within the EU there's lots of small tensions, internal tensions, like the violation case against Poland. Do you believe that in view of the crisis, the disputes, the controversies can be overcome in the long run? Right now, people are agreed, that's clear, but couldn't that spirit that you have can be rescued over a longer period to ignore the controversies for a while? I would follow from that sovereignty term. We've been talking about European sovereignty for a while, and France did so in the Council presidency when it had it, and we're discussing what it means. Why European sovereignty is not something abstract, but it's a defined capacity to act for us as Europe. In all spheres that are concerned, we simply have to become more sovereign in energy supply. That's what we'll be talking about. Climate policy, that's even more related than before. In defense policies, absolutely so. What I see is we're on the right track. The heads of state and government feel much more now that without the EU, without the common resolve in Europe as individual nation states, we would not have that capacity to act because we're simply a bit economically stronger. Well, at the same time, not all the conflicts should be totally discarded. You said tensions within Europe, well, they would not disappear from one day to the next. That's certainly not the case. We have the contract violation case that is ongoing and the rule of law discussion that we have been having with Poland and Hungary. There's a certain difference. You have to distinguish between the two. There are talks with Hungary. But these are issues that we cannot just delete and forget, because at this moment we have this huge solidarity that we've developed. These questions will drive us around for a long time. Also further on, we need responses to that. We should not be naive. We're on the right track. Everybody knows we need Europe, also geopolitically. It was not clear who knew about the war before. The accession clause, the military assistance clause was not discussed in the European Union. We're discussing new things now. We're growing together further. We have two more questions that have come in that sort of fit in the context. The second first. Ukraine does not fulfill all the criteria for EU accession, but it needs support, of course. Are the criteria losing credibility that way? Does anybody want to pick up that question? The tension between support right now and the normal process of accession, as we know, takes long, or may take long. That's what we said. It's not about the final accession date. And Mr. Mojan, it's not going to be tomorrow morning. It will be a process, but the commitment of going that process together and not leaving a threatened and victimized people alone. This is the message that Ukraine needs. We know about the entirety of the problems. We know that corruption prevails as a large topic. Talking about the international rating, Ukraine certainly does not show a good place. But that's not the topic of the hour. People are dying. That is the topic of the hour. People stands up and resists and tries to survive. That's why it needs a clear signal. That's not naive, but being aware that reconstruction and energy is necessary, work is necessary, where also Germany received that at some point after World War II. Mind you, Germany, West Germany at least, had the friendship and the mercy of its partners that was available, and they bestowed it on the Germans to be readmitted into a circle of democratic states, which was highly dubious a few years before. Sure, development push may be influenced in neighboring countries. Sure, we may help overcome hurdles, which we will do. I'll pick up the second question. I would now jump sort of to refuge. Migration research not said Europe has the opportunity to counter with a humanitarian project similar to the 1948 Berlin airlift, to counter that Putin aggression. That's a gigantic task. Mr. Mukherjee, you're observing it. You certainly will have talked about the 2015 refugee crisis and have pursued that. The tremendous leap that Europe, that the EU, that Poland and the countries in Eastern Europe have done, what is your assessment with a view to Ukraine? You know, talking about the airlift as a metaphor and a historic analogy, just on Thursday we resolved by the Cultural Ministers Conference here in Germany where the DAAD plays a role under the heading Science Bridge between Ukraine and Germany, what is about in schooling and in science, give maximum support which we mobilize, and to make it possible for the Ukrainians, once they come here, given these grave conditions, that they could find their way as easily as possible into schools and universities. This is the bridge which we're organizing right now. In the unification process of the EU over the recent 10-20 years, what we have seen is, as the Eastern European countries, the Central East European countries that have joined the EU recently, massively have profited from it. We have profited from them, they have profited from us, and this way, Europe as a science location in global competition has profited all in all. Let me build a bridge to some points that were raised just recently from a science policy point of view. The situation that we are facing in and around Ukraine must be seen as a point in time where, if I may say so, there is a movement in Europe. Many things that we know, freedom of science, free academic work, international exchange, will thrive only and can thrive only while we do so in safety and security. And that security, as we can see, is not an automaton. It must be secured and backed up. And so it's a good thing if some considerations by President Macron, which he has been sharing with us for some years now, if we fall back on these ideas, in the 2017 election campaign, he said, we need a Europe that protects us, a Europe that protects us. And this literal sense, we see how important it is. Otherwise, we could not enjoy free academic cooperation. So casting a glance at the EU unification in recent years and a look at what happens around Ukraine is utterly important for us. We have to look ahead how international scientific policy relations are shaped further. The Western Balkans was just mentioned from a different perspective, but we in academia, we just see the international scientific exchange relations with Moldova, with the Western Balkan states must be intensified and bring them further to the EU space as a space of education, a space of research, so that better they can be culturally integrated. Let me remind you, it is dating to President Macron, the Initiative for European Universities. That is a funding program. Yes, everybody is happy to get money from Brussels, but what President Macron in his famous or ignominious Sorbonne speech goes way beyond that. He ascertained, let me say so, at universities, the European identity is lived and is further developed. Universities are the intellectual hub of Europe. You can see what role universities play for the identity development of Europe. And what we've been seeing is a combat for European identity. So from the many things we have observed in recent years, fighting, for instance, the problems that have arisen through the migration, through the flight to Europe, the refugee movement, what comes back from Ukraine, from all that we can learn a great deal, and science will contribute. You mentioned the flight and migration is even more monumental than it seems to have been 2015, 2016, as it was the case back then. There is a clause now, this mass influx directive, which the EU has taken out of the drawer. Why didn't they do so in 2015? That's a correct question. And that's what many people in our constituencies ask us when we are around in schools. Just a few days ago, I received the question from a young man of Syrian descent. Why does that come up now? It's a correct question. Why do you remember that now? But you have to gear the question to when the blockades were built in those days against such solutions. And these are the countries mentioned, in particular Poland and Hungary, where no sufficient understanding was shared that already was the maximum alert that the European Union should have listened to and should have heard. At the borders, where the adjacent countries have the problem to shoulder the problems almost alone with few help, little assistance from the northern countries, many people with families drown in the Mediterranean. This is such a big shame for the European Union, for all those who could help. You can't mince words about that. When you listen to the political discussion, in Poland not least, which has clearly opened the borders, clearly has accepted some 2 million people that have arrived in Poland, and they feed and accommodate the refugees. And you should say so without having evil ideas. Well, people say from time to time, these are closer neighbors, is what you keep hearing. These are, so to speak, people whose language is similar or closely related to our own language. Let's not be afraid of that knowledge, that solidarity is necessary. Sure, let us stop for a moment. It's important to realistically look at it. A few days ago, I was in the circle of the Social Democratic Development Ministers in Montpellier, courageous men and women, all of whom say it's the time to ensure that this mechanism not only is a preliminary effect, but has a durability for the major crises of this world, so that the European Union not gets back to the nationalistic considerations that it moves back to. Jean-Claude Juncker in the previous Commission tried to get a European asylum and immigration policy with a humane touch. The European Parliament had all the laws for it that they had resolved upon. It was not the European Parliament's fault. It was the Council, the member states I mentioned, the blockading positions that they built up together with others. That's got to go. And the time will be ripe for us to discuss it up front and to set the points.
Mr. Woman, you have just mentioned it. There are discrepancies with Hungary, Poland. We see that Poland receives lots and lots of refugees, and they shoulder the main burden of this crisis, and that is something we need to recognize and appreciate. But wouldn't it be a form of racism to say, well, Ukraine is our neighbor, that are people that maybe understand even our language, they are our neighbors, and when someone flees from Syria, we prefer not to accept that person? Well, it's a fact that Ukraine, the Ukrainians that come to our countries, they come because they suffer from bombing and shelling at home. The same was true in 2015, 2016 in Syria. The opponent was actually the same. It was also the Russian Federation in Syria. It was also President Putin who, in parts, shelled Syrian cities. And there's the city of Aleppo, 2 million inhabitants, that was shelled by Russia. So the opponent is the same as in 2015, 2016. We should remember that. But the dangers, well, are still the same. And we now have to give refuge and shelter to those who are in danger, at risk at home, no matter where they come from. Because a human life is worth the same no matter where this person comes from. We need to do a maximum in order to protect human lives. People need support. These refugees need support. That's why we need to support them. And I think it's absolutely right that the Ukrainians that flee in our countries now, we give them the opportunity to work, access to the labor market. There are no restrictions, no limitations, no restrictions regarding schooling of children. Education is very important. Without education, the children will not have good opportunities and chances to find a place in the labor market. The risk that they radicalize will be larger. So, by the way, at the time in 2015 already, 2016, in the refugee camps in Lebanon, in Jordan, in Tunisia, we have experienced the following. In autumn, when the school year starts, in order to have the necessary stuff for the children, a sufficient number of teachers, infrastructure, books, and all the necessary, in order to have that, you started preparing that in February, March. You need to provide funds, you need to make them available, you need to ensure that you've got sufficient teachers, you need to build up the infrastructure for schooling. So if now in those countries we see so many refugees, it is important to start already preparing the next school year for Ukrainian children that are received in our European Union member states. In Romania, until today, we have now received more than 450,000 Ukrainian refugees. Some of them have already left my country, but many are still there. And there were lots of Romanian volunteers that went to the border, that have opened their houses and apartments, that have received refugees. That's correct, that's good, that is good. And we need to be ready now. We need to ensure that people that have come into our countries and that may stay probably for more than just several weeks and will need our support for longer, that we don't lack the necessary means to support them. The European Union is going to support them, but what is important is the willingness, the preparedness in all EU member states to do more than in the past. Also, in order to come back to your question, also because now many citizens in our EU countries see the danger is imminent. Now they all experience that the threat coming from Russia is a threat, a danger for the security of Europe. And this is why now we see the preparedness, the willingness to get engaged, to get involved. And Putin, the Russian Federation, need to be stopped in order to avoid that escalation is increasing, is going on. We need to ensure that people, as long as they are in our countries, that they don't lack the necessary. And on that day, when they are able to return to their home country, that we also support them in restoring, in rebuilding Ukraine. That's our responsibility. Mr. Mureșan, thank you very much. You talked about the willingness, the preparedness in Romania. It's similar here in Germany. We see lots of volunteers working here at the central station. I know lots of people here in the city that have opened their homes to refugees, but that's only the beginning, and it's going to continue for a long time. In 2015, 2016, we saw that there was a lot of dispute regarding the sharing of the burden, how to really make sure that all migrants were received. Do you think that we do better within the EU now? Would you support Mr. Mureșan? What would you think, Ms. Haupt? Yes, I subscribe to what the previous speaker said. In 2015, 2016, we've also seen war refugees. The situation in Europe, in our society, was much more difficult. There were more obstacles than now with Ukrainian refugees. I'm extremely happy that this instrument of the Mass Influx Directive does now exist, that it is now implemented, that it has come into force, but I would not see that as a permanent solution. It was mentioned already. It's a directive that focuses on exceptional situations. It's based on the idea that we should respond to that mass influx and make sure that people are spread evenly across the European Union, that they can be registered, to get them in as quickly as possible, to provide shelter to them. I think Putin intended to destabilize the European Union also as a result of that wave of migrants. And that was not possible. That didn't happen because we do have that instrument, this directive that allows for quick integration here. 200,000 people in Germany already. This is the number that the federal police has counted. I'm sure that the number is even much, much larger because many have not registered yet. And we need to do everything we can in order to learn from the mistakes that were made in 2015, 2016, and enable quick integration of these refugees. I hope that these people can return to their home countries once the war is over. They all hope for that. But we need to learn from the mistakes that were made in the past. We need to prepare fast and speedy integration on the basis of that Mass Influx Directive. And people don't have to go into refugee camps. They can try and find homes. They've got more liberties to integrate into our society. There's health provision, health services that are provided. They are allowed to enter the labor market. So we are on a good path already. The ground has been prepared, and we need to do whatever we can to integrate them into society. And the fact that there is such an enormous willingness in the different municipalities and the different cities, I think we will do much better than in 2015, 2016 across Europe. Looking forward, of course, it's crucial now that for the future, the European asylum and migration policy needs to be revised. Very often we failed politically in the past as the European Union. When you look at the hundreds and thousands of people that drowned in the Mediterranean Sea, when we look at the situation at Moria, the pushbacks, we should not forget the pushbacks, the critical role of Frontex, which has been discussed so frequently. When we talk about European values, this is one of the major, let's say, construction sites areas where we need to take action. And France has taken that as their focal point during the EU presidency, the Schengen Council that is now being set up. And we still have to do a lot and go a long way in order to improve the situation. But the large level of solidarity, the empathy that we feel everywhere helps us to prepare the ground and be on a good path in order to have a more humane system in the EU. Well, lots of good statements. We will be able to do it. 2.0. Well, that's a new attempt, and once we stand together, we can do it, and we need to think about how to do it. Well, we can do it. Yeah, that was a good statement at the time in 2015, and it's still valid and correct. Well, a question, or rather a statement that I would like to direct to Mr. Mukherjee. Why do we have such a bad understanding in the West, or lack of knowledge about Russia and Eastern Europe? Is that your perception as well, politically? No, not at all. The person asking that question should explain in more detail what the backdrop to that statement is. We have a lot of expertise at the German universities, our member institutions, the different scientific institutions. Policy receives advice and consulting from the scientific community that has a very strong tradition in Europe, because the political decision-making and opinion-making findings should be based on findings. We've seen that during the COVID-19 pandemic, and we do that in all other fields as well. I cannot see that in Germany there is a lack of historic insights or knowledge or cultural, historic or linguistic or language knowledge about Russia or Eastern Europe. I don't see this lack of competence. In the contrary, we see that in many talk shows, rounds of discussions, scientific formats, us as the German Academic Exchange Service also organized talk shows or talk rounds in our fora. We do see the high level of expertise, and this expertise, if I may voice it in a rather pointed manner, this expertise is very important so that you do not fall prey to pseudo-historic theories that are put forward by certain sides or stakeholders and fall prey to that. And when we look at the editorials, the scientific articles, I only see that these pseudo-theories coming from a specific site, that they are sort of analyzed and counteracted with good arguments. So that's a contradiction from the panel here regarding the statement that was voiced in the chat. I would like to jump forward and talk about climate protection. Well, during our last meeting here in Berlin, that was already one of the major topics, the European Green Deal, a huge package of funds. Climate neutrality by 2015 is the aspiration. 55% of greenhouse gases should be reduced by 2030, and now Ms. von der Leyen says it should be done even faster. Isn't that bitter irony that in war things are accelerated? Well, yes, it is the way it is. The climate crisis doesn't disappear due to the fact that we have war in Europe, and on the other hand, all of these topics are closely interlinked. I mentioned it earlier. European sovereignty means, first and foremost, also to be sovereign when it comes to energy supply, security of energy supply. It is correct that the energy imports need to be diversified in order to be less dependent of certain states, but by doing so, we should not make a mistake to only count on diversification. We should also be autonomous, independent of fossil fuels, fossil energies, and divert to new energy forms, renewable energies, regenerative energies that are more decentral in nature, not only freedom or liberty energies, but also other forms of energies. And that's a crucial question. The fact that there is this major political consensus, that it's possible to have that consensus, that is a positive fact, I would say, and we should make best possible use of it and not sort of reduce our efforts and not to go too much into the details. Of course, the energy transition is one aspect, but we should also look at where the raw materials come from for batteries, circular economy that needs to be strengthened. Again, that's environmental and climate policy, but at the same time, it's security policy because it also helps us to become more autonomous of raw materials, of resources. When we look at the new battery directive, for example, requirements regarding the recycling part of batteries, that means we need less raw materials and resources. If we establish that circular economy, we can keep the different resources within Europe. So very important question. Climate policy is a vast range of different topics, and to accelerate all that, well, that is an effort that needs to be made and needs to be strengthened, and I'm very optimistic, confident, in spite of the current situation that we are facing. You see me with a certain level of optimism, and of course we can go deeper into the details. Well, you have depicted it. It is a strategic question, not just a climate protection question. But Mr. Böhmer, that would mean at short notice that we need to use more fossil fuels in the short run, for example, lignite coming from the Rhine area, or certain power blocks, power stations need to be started up again in order to secure our supply. That means first we move away from our objectives regarding the reduction of fossil fuels, and at the same time we become more autonomous of Russian oil and gas. Well, I'm already happy that the overall policy in our minds is correct. If you quote Ms. von der Leyen, when we had the last challenge, COVID-19 or crisis, we also had different voices, and we were not all on the same line. Some people who said, well, we need to have a break when it comes to ecologic change and transition, because some thought it was too much of a burden for the industry. But what we've done was absolutely right. Next Generation EU, for example, the 750 billion funding package to say, well, this is a program against the crisis, but also a program for the future. We invest not in technology of the past, but we want a modernization push into the right direction that needs to be triggered by that package. It's a precarious situation that has been conjured up now, and you mentioned that in particular in those countries that depend of Russian gas. We know what we talk about. That was their primary source. Well, that's a fact. In spite of that, we must not answer that by going backwards. And technologically speaking, it's not that simple. When we look at the first-class engineers, we understand that we cannot just start up nuclear power stations once more or extend their lifespan. And it makes no sense neither to bring up the coal element or coal part in our energy mix. We need to be courageous to really go that path towards the ecological transition and accelerate our efforts with all the implications that are entailed in construction law that we keep discussing in politics. No premiers should block these different decisions. We should extend the use of renewables and invest into the necessary infrastructure without thinking of wind farms that may be an eyesore, etc. But there's another point that I take to my heart, which I think has been perfectly developed in your work in the labs, and we've seen that in the presentations. The dimension of consumer behavior was depicted, the dimension of our language that we use, the framing that we use. And this brings us to the question as to the connotations in our minds, the seriousness of how we accept and take up the challenge. That's an indispensable part of our approach, because in my field I work very hard to not only talk about the Green Deal. The Green Deal for me is a technical tool, an instrument. The actual objective, the aspiration is not the Green Deal. The actual objective is the sustainability agenda of the United Nations. That is the compass that we use, because it shows to us how complex change of that development model needs to be, that we need to favor and that we need to make forward to fight against poverty, to have gender equality. It includes shrinking spaces in society that must not be accepted, but that we need liberty and freedom for science and research. And only when we fight against imbalances at the global level, we will create societies that intrinsically are strong enough to bring about the technological change which is necessary. It's not a new finding that modern technologies need to be faultless. Nuclear power stations, not a mini fault, must be able to destroy humankind, and they need to be democratically available, and that's what we see in the energy transition. Or when we talk about the question how to really shape our industrial or economic cycles, they need to be sustainable, they need to be viable so that we can still master them. So that transition that we need in the social field as much as in the economic field also brings up the question of democracy that we need to manage our own future. And that builds a bridge again towards academia, academic exchange among students and researchers, trainers and trainees. That is so essential for that transformation that we so urgently need, because all of these are tailor tailor-made solutions that we bring into villages and regions in the world. That's our objective. And we need lots of intelligences for that, not only the technological engineers, but also those who do it in a social field and a human field and communicate that. So it is a task for humankind. And my intellectual political compass, therefore, are the SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, because this program is so complex, so well put together, that I know about the certain instruments. The Green Deal is one of them, but it's not a top-down strategy that helps us to have a better world. It's only an energy achievement that is carried at grassroots level by all of us, and where we need the good framing at top, the making available of the different tools that we need for that policy.
Right, we have to stand together. I'd like to go over to you, Mr. Murshand. You were rapporteur regarding the resilience facility of the EU, what I will mention as part of the Next Generation EU, an instrument to overcome the pandemic, but also against the backdrop of moving the sustainability goal forward. What did you find out? As the European Union, we've resolved that 30% of EU funds that we will be making available over the next years to be invested into green projects. The European Union in the next few years will spend more money than ever before, about 1,100 billion euros from the budget of the European Union over the next 7 years, and 750 billion euros from Next Generation EU. The Reconstruction Fund that right after the corona crisis began, that was put up, that was launched, the biggest fund, really, the biggest rescue package that the European Union has in its own history ever resolved upon. 750 billion to help companies, to help people, to help regions that were corona-stricken, also that were impacted by social and economic consequences, for their support. 30% of all the funds are to be invested this way. From the Corona Reconstruction Fund, it's to be 37%. We see why the European Union spends so much money now. It's unparalleled. We've never had such an economic package before. Then we have to spend the money in such a way that our industry becomes more modern, more digital, but also greener and more energy efficient. And that's why we have clear objectives. We want energy efficiency. Energy efficiency means that in the future, in order to reach the same, to achieve the same, we will be consuming less energy. This way, the dependency on foreign energy sources is mitigated, is dropped, is reduced, and it's like from Russian gas, and it's good for the environment. These are the goals for the next few years. We should pursue those goals with the same stamina, with the same resolve, no matter if in parallel there are other crises or not. Because we as the European Union must also learn to grow from all our weaknesses, to work on these weaknesses. Over the past 10, 15 years, from the 2010 years on, we exclusively dealt with business and finance. 2015, 16, we almost only dealt with refugees and migration. Then for some 2 years, with the Brexit, the British leaving the UK, the heads of state and heads of government were chiefly concerned with that topic in recent years. And then it was the corona crisis. It has been the corona crisis over the past 2 years. We have to learn as the European Union to follow up more than on one topic, to be attentive. All the weak points need to be overcome, need to be improved. And that's why I say Green Deal, yes, must be a priority. To reach the goals, of course, we have to invest a good deal. That's why it also takes a strong and competitive and innovative businesses and industry to reach the goals in the Green Deal as well. Although we have problems, there are problems following from the war in Ukraine, so we may reach the goals. Growth and climate protection together is not going to be an easy task. You say you must invest, the companies must invest, the states. And DAAD has been promoting 4 research centers on climate protection. What's your promise? What do we expect in these future topics? The same thing as in all other things that we do as the DAAD, that there is scientific exchange that we are living, that we are promoting in the centers, you know. We have likewise parallel 4 centers for pandemic research, the big challenge of the previous 2 years, which will drive us around further. In both these groups of centers, the matter is that academic scientists are brought together on an international level. We know in international levels, international teams, the best results are brought about. That's a finding from many contexts, and we do this with postdocs, with university graduates. We move them cross-border into international networks. And it is our hope, of course, that we get the best talent together so that in these diverse international groups we find good solutions for the future questions, as you raised, with a view to climate change in particular, so we can make it work. I think we as the science have to contribute significantly, and as a mobility fund like the DAAD in particular. As pointed out, you may also ask questions. So far, this option has not been used, but there is a question. I hear. Thank you so much. I am a member of the DAAD group. 25 years ago, this experience was a great honor that as a grantee at TU Clausthal, I did my doctoral dissertation in the field of environmental protection technologies, climate protection, and that's why I have this interest ongoing, also for this meeting here. Last September, when I spoke up, yes, we will discuss it. You said it'll be interesting. In the current situation, yes, it's very, very hard. It's a very interesting debate that we have been hearing. As the DAAD president, Professor Mukherjee, said early on, I wrote down, we have to have a European way of life, and that should be defined. And later, you mentioned, what are the European identities? What are the values, right? Under the impression that, say, in Romania, we know what the situation is with Ukrainian refugees in Romania, and we know as they are on their way, that this has been on the news all the time. It's different when you see it. You see the women with small children, truly a highly difficult discussion. So that's the question. What actually is this European way of life? What identity is it? You also mentioned, I heard that the concept, the EU concept, next generation EU, how can that go together? What it takes, I think, is European values, clearly to be defined values. Maybe we will manage, because of the crisis situation, to think about what do we want as Europeans. Truly, what are the European values? What does the DAAD promote in this respect? This is the most important point, in my opinion. Thank you so much. Who wants to pick it up? The European way of life, Mr. Mukherjee, what does that embody, in your view? We have talked less about the foundation for our values, which we share as Europeans, that we stand for. In these days, we talk about a value-guided foreign policy. And in view of the current development, I think this is particularly essential. That's why I'm grateful for the question. If you call it a European way of life, actually, what is meant more is the idea that we have had over the past 30 years, since the 1989-90 political turnaround, that we can live in freedom, that nobody will jeopardize that. Recently, now, we must say, obviously, it is jeopardized. It is not so safe. We draw the conclusions from it at the political level. To go to the core, because you used the term of the values and the community, this is exactly what we stand for as the DAAD. We, as Europeans, that we represent values such as liberty, freedom of press, freedom of science, freedom of opinion, that we also stand up for a free and democratic basic order. We stand for division of power, for sovereignty of the people. We stand for solidarity likewise. This is what the European Union stands for, the principle of solidarity across nation states. This is the big added value of the huge project that the EU is, where we have more potent people to address that. But what I just suggested accounts for the foundation of our values. And we see this is not shared by everybody globally, to put it in a cautious term. And this is why both belongs together. We in science, in academia, and in other fields, we stand for life, for this European way of life being actually practiced. We stand for the freedoms that the European way of life stands for. But we also have to find ways, buzzword Europe, which protects us, how these liberties, how these freedoms can be protected for us and for ours. We are in a situation together where it is being attacked from the outside, obviously. Mr. Mukherjee, thank you. I'll cast a glance at the European research and education space. I introduced you, Mr. Buhlmann. The exchange across borders plays a gigantic role. There's the European University Strategy paper, which was just released a few days ago. The idea of the European University or college should be expanded. I think it's 41 now. There are meant to be more than that, possibly European leaving certificate, so you have a graduation Europe-wide, and also a student card throughout Europe. How do you see the strategy plan? Well, that's a huge jump from the values to the institutional measures. Well, let's see, building bridges, I'll go over that bridge indeed. Thing about the values, you know, Professor Mukherjee wonderfully outlined it. All of them are laid down in the treaties of the European Union, the TFEU. What we may find that they are vaguely lived or that they are needed of improvement at times. And the thing about the identity, this was what the audience question was, the European way of life. That's a positive thing, has something of a projection in it, of the idea how to become even better because you act in a value-oriented way. And the university have a central space, a central place in it. As the factories for thinking, for deliberating. And once the historians work on this war, there will be political scientists, journalists, men and women, but there will also be psychologists, maybe even psychiatrists, who find out that this evil spirit that shook the Kremlin with that awful intervention, obviously, was driven by fear, where demarcation lines meant to be built, where space for encounter should have been organized in a modern society. Well, I dare a projection to the European university landscape, and I take along my value set to consider what is the university and education landscape of tomorrow, what does it look like, meant to look like. Then I'll work with the surplus idea that these are the breeding places of understanding, of progress, and I'll talk about the content. I would like to say what I've seen today what has inspired me that I'm talking about it, enthusiastic reports from your labs as I've seen them here. And then I see an institution that has been around for very many decades is fitting so wonderfully in the modern society. Congratulations, Mr. President. Congratulations, I should say. Well, let us lean back for a second how we can live that content. And whether there is inspiration around that flows into the colleges, through the networks, through the connected people, and there will be adequate forms, there will be adequate results, and then, thanks to the idea, they will follow the idea. I have no doubt about it. This is the simple answer. The other thing was what I meant to say, so that we're not only talking about institutional configurations. Where you build a European university landscape, something will happen like what the Bologna process was, without it being a European law or legislation that was promulgated, meaning adapting models. You can't agree on modules if there's no an accountability and adaptability of student performance. So there will be similar organizational forms for courses in all diversity, whatever that will be in the content. That all will happen. What the spirit is that drives that process forward. Will it be too much bureaucracy? Will it be a loss of democracy, where the federal level has nothing to say when organizing the content of education? Or whether it'll be a dialogue process, a democratic process, where those working in schools, in universities, will bring to the table their spirit, so it becomes more solidarity principle and not what the name of the degree is in the end. Thank you. I'm looking at the watch. I think we can have another final round. I think anybody else? Thumbs up. Mr. Morshan, he is a DAAD alumnus. He experienced himself what the exchange makes possible, what you will learn, and with a view to the strategy that's maybe forthcoming, could it be that the EU puts a large pot of money there and does not fill it with life? What's your idea for it to work out that the spirit that Mr. Bullmann addressed actually gets implemented and that the money is meaningfully used for the university landscape to be improved further? The fact is, many students that do exchange semesters, research stays within the European Union, this way make progress in their academic careers, their professional careers. They develop further, of course, in many respects. They become more competitive in the European market, the labor market, that is outside their home countries, but also at home, in their own national centers. International experience is helpful today to be successful academically, but also in private business. As an entrepreneur, to have better prospects of success. And I feel we certainly need to forge more direct contacts between students, between researchers, which we fund, which we promote. And in the end, use the positive, the benefits, the positive experiences. We should carry that on. We should learn to talk about Erasmus programs, about what the DAAD does for us, for our universities, for colleges, but also for the individual student, for the teachers, the professors, what it means. And by participating in such programs, what has become possible, which without the international programs would not have been around. Financial support by the European Union is essential. It's important for research, also for medical research. It contributes significantly to Europe remaining competitive, that still, as before, we have goods and services that are called for, that are inquired in the global markets, that are future-oriented. We can manufacture them, all that is a good thing. These are achievements, all that which in recent years we have done good. So many, 1 million Erasmus students that we've supported inside the European Union, but also in countries outside, say, people from Ukraine. We should also talk about that much more. The personal experience is highly important. Opening up, publishing it is significant. That's why I enjoyed being here with you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you. We have another question here in the round. I'm afraid the mic is off. I haven't been here since the beginning. We had a delayed flight from Vienna, but I heard some things. I've been here since 6:30, actually. I believe. Initially, I thought, should I make a critical comment in the first place? As somebody who has experienced war between 92 and 95 in Sarajevo, myself, my own body, I can contribute a different perspective in this war matter from my own view. That's one thing. The other thing, what Mr. Mutaci said to the Western Balkans, if you give me 2 minutes. In Sarajevo, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, 92, 95, we had the same talks, that we had the same slogans from the EU. We're part of it, we will help. At that time, we were banned from buying arms. Dear people, you've got to act now. The aggressor needs to be stopped. Okay, the NATO must not send soldiers, right? Like the former Sigmar Gabriel, the former Foreign Secretary, said, we must not risk a third world war. That's true, maybe. But you've got to consider to supply more arms to those people for them to defend themselves. I know that from my own experience, from my own personal experience. Help the people. I've seen how people are dying. Not only adults, also children, what it looks like where houses get destroyed by shelling. Think about it, please do. The aggressor needs to be stopped. That's one thing. The other thing, Mr. Mureșan, you talked about the Western Balkans. You said all countries of the Western Balkans have the same prospect, and there's negotiation going on with all of them. That's not true. The only country from the Western Balkan that the EU negotiates with, the chapters individually have been published, talking about accession, is Serbia. That's the only one. And from my point of view, I think that's another mistake you're making. You said, dear North Macedonians, do the deal with the Greeks, and we will negotiate with you, the Macedonians, and they have done the deal with the Greeks. And who stopped it? Mr. Macron. Either all the West Balkan countries are simultaneously going to negotiate. I'm not saying we need to accede at the same time. Truly, you as Europeans, we must negotiate at the same time to begin negotiating with all the countries. Maybe some will make it in 2 months and my country will make it in 20 years. But the only country that is elected to become a part right now is Serbia. That's a good thing. It's got to be that way. But please don't forget, Serbia is not the Western Balkan. Thank you for listening. My apology if I've been too agitated. You have experienced war yourselves, and so this excitement is easy to understand. What is our response? What can it be? I've known Mostar and Sarajevo from before the war. I know what he reported. This is true. I can support him. Also, the analysis is correct. Yes, Macron prevented it. That's true. We didn't have time enough to discuss Macron's impact. Both sides of the same coin, mind you. the honest perspective of the big slogans, the banner headlines is one thing, but we have to live it. In Northern Macedonia and in Greece, both heads of government ran a high risk against resistance, partly highly irrational resistance in their own nations, and they have paid a high price without having gotten that which was promised. It was a historic achievement that has moved them forward, but it would be worth not only to remind that, but to make something of it. I fully subscribe to what the contributor said. Thank you, Mr. Bullman. Let me get back to the European educational area. Something was presented. The first responses were some people are positive. They said it will be a challenge to impact that on the national level, to make it work. It differs from country to country. You would like to have your own thing. You're a member of the Bundestag. What is your assessment? Can we get that working in Germany? Of course, it should not be wonderful ventures, projects, and good ideas. The European University must be implemented in practice. I've known that myself. Freiburg, my home uni, has a tri-national association on the Upper Rhine River. And then in the end, it's about profane, practical things like that the lecture lists are technically not compatible, and for students it's utterly difficult to have a course in Strasbourg University to select that when you come from Freiburg. It's about the question of cross-border semester ticket, which is utterly complicated with the various transport hubs that you have. France had a totally different system. All of that are huge problems that sound profane, but we have to contribute that the feeling of the European University cross-border studies, cross-border research may be brought about. That's a big task. It's great that the European Union has made it a task, an assignment for it, and that they want to really invest real money. And we in Germany will do everything to practically implement it. For me, this is sort of the third point that was lacking, the perspective of students and researchers. It's about concretely living Europe, not only top-notch research and values, but also down-to-earth, practical European research, education, and exchange the sore spots. Certainly, the president of Gießen University could have contributed. I'd like to take the chance for a final question from the audience. It goes in a different direction. It's not an EU context. That is, if the DAAD still has contact with researchers and scientists in Russia, and what there is any support. Of course, we have contact with scientists and researchers in Russia. We are member universities, and the DAADs have lots of partnerships and joint projects with people in Russia, which are currently suspended. I said that in the beginning. The personal contacts are around. Yes, they exist. We have, in part, decades of friendships with many Russian colleagues. And where support is referred to, if you say that further on, there will be funding for those that are here as Russian guest lecturers or guest scientists. That is the case. Yes, we've made that plain. From our point of view, we're not curbing that. We want to keep that channel open. Where support means, if you say critical academics that are jeopardized in Russia can come here and receive grants. Well, we have protection programs for that. Our friends in the Humboldt Foundation and us ourselves at the DAAD, this is available. Also, others have programs. The question, of course, follows up from an important point for the next few weeks and months. Handling Russia, we have to be careful in distinguishing between the Russian government, the Russian state, the the target of our sanctions on the one hand, and the many individual Russians, the scientists and researchers, of whom many are critical vis-à-vis the regime, of whom many have signed the petition, which I mentioned before, where they, at the one or other junction, come to us. I feel also us will deserve to join and support them. Thank you so much, Mr. Mukherjee. Thank you.
Well, I would like to thank all my guests, Mr. Moshan in Brussels, Mr. Blom-Miskopf. It was great to have you here, that we've had this exchange, that we have been discussing this different topic. It was a pleasure. I hope it was a pleasure for the audience as well. Thank you for listening, although we extended the session a bit longer than expected. I hope it was interesting to all of you. I wish all of you here in the room lots of ideas, lots of courage during your sessions tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. I hope for a fruitful exchange. All the best to you. And I would like to tell the moderators that are guiding the workshops in the 2 days to come to stay here for a moment, because there will be sort of training sessions for you with some hints. Thank you very much for being here, and I wish you a pleasant evening. Thank you very much, and goodbye.